You're listening to Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall on CJAD 800.
That is James Mennie. He is over at the Montreal Gazette. So, Jim, new Leger survey just came out not that long ago this afternoon. Thanks for sending that along. And the news, if you want to say, for François Legault, continues to just get worse. Is that fair?
Yeah, and you know what's crazy, Aaron, is that this is an astounding result given our experience in the past with public sector strikes. And before I go any further, I just want our listeners to know this is not a survey that was conducted for the unions. If you know, because we tend to look at things like that, something of a John Desai. This was conducted by Leger Marketing for the TVA News Network. And the bottom line here is that when it comes to teachers, 56% of respondents completely support the strike as a pressure tactic. And even more astoundingly, when you go do a subset and look at respondents with school-age children, that level rises to 63%. Okay. Meanwhile, overall, for the common front, which is not just teachers but also healthcare workers and social workers, that overall support for that is 54%. And even the pollsters are saying we've never seen this before. And you at this point you really have to ask yourself whether finally François Legault picked the wrong fight. Whether finally, even though in the beginning he was huffing and puffing and talking about patients being taken hostage and, you know, the poor children go back, apparently he got this wrong. This is a cross-section of Quebec society and it suggests quite strongly that they are going to be able, perhaps, to push a little harder, shall we say. And it's funny, this poll drops just as I've been seeing all these kinds of sonar ping headlines coming out that the pace of negotiations is accelerating. That progress does seem to be made. Whether this result may turn around to, may result in the unions turning around, wait a minute here, maybe we should ask for a little bit more, I don't know. But what I do find interesting is we have yet another example of how the guy who likes to run around sort of suggesting he's the head of the Quebec nation, completely out of pace with what that so-called nation is thinking about, how it feels. And we've seen it. I've been listening to the show this afternoon, Aaron. We've heard all about health, but education doesn't get anywhere near as much attention as the health sector. And I think for a lot of our listeners, for a lot of Quebecers, it is front and center. Everyone, nobody wants to go to the hospital, but everyone's got to send their kids to school. And clearly, there is a message that's being sent here to this government. Of course, this government being this government, the big question is, will it bother to listen?
Well, all you have to do, Jim, of course, right, is look around classrooms. Did you see kids in classrooms today, as the Premier promised? He said Monday was the day. The only people there were who?
Well,
not there.
That's why I don't take tips from him about how to bet at the track. But anyway, all that said, it's this guy, really, we're chuckling about it. This is the Premier of Quebec. This is not some guy we met in a bar. This is not your taxi driver. This is the Premier of Quebec. He's supposed to have a clue about what he's talking about, and he certainly should not be, how can I put it, blowing smoke on something as important as the future of education and indeed the healthcare system in this province. And lest we forget, guys, this was the government in 2018. Legault said it. We are the government of healthcare. We are the government of education. We've talked about the poll, and quite frankly, I was listening to my buddy Aaron Durfell on with you earlier. I was listening to Paul Boulinet. And I felt like jumping out a window because even though it's like one of those things, when someone comes up and reminds you about it in detail, you realize, holy crap, what's the next step?
I just wondered, to get back to how we started on this poll result, right, showing people still support for the public sector unions. Clearly, the government misread this, right? They would have thought by now we're all sick and tired of it. And of course, support will be leaning toward the government. So that being the case, Jim, how long can they continue to act this way and pretend there's going to be a settlement when there actually isn't one? Is this something that's going to happen, do you think, over the holidays so we can start the new year with the whole thing settled? What do you think?
Well, I was chatting a while back with David Eltag when you guys were off, and I sort of predicted that, if this does not get settled before Christmas, we're going to see back-to-work legislation. Not entirely sure that, given the light of these numbers, that Legault is going to pull the trigger on something like that. But that said, you keep, what will they do? It's not they, it's Francois Legault. Everybody is holding their fire until, le boss decides what the next step is going to be. But quite frankly, we're talking about the results of a Léger poll on this strike action. I think down the road, the next Léger poll that comes out in terms of popular support for political parties will have even worse news for Francois Legault if this latest survey is any indication.
All right. Let me move on from that to a story, and I guess this is picked up now in the French media, which is why it's gaining some traction. Antoine Dion Charest, who's been on a couple of times with us.
Yeah.
He's the son, of course, of Jean Charest. Big piece in the French press, and the question now being asked, is he ready for the limelight as far as Quebec politics are concerned? What are you thinking here?
Well, I got to tell you, and I'm sure you guys do the same when you're having meetings to put together the day's show. When I'm in a news meeting and if somebody is pitching a story, the fundamental question is, why do we need to know this now? And you can read, it's a great story, very informative, but the fundamental question is, why are we talking to this guy now? And what I found interesting was the only sort of reference to the Liberal leadership, to even becoming involved in politics, was that he did not dismiss it out of hand. And yet here we are, finding all about this Charest the Younger, as I like to call him, finding out what his strengths are, getting his pedigree as his political acumen. And I noticed two things. First of all, I haven't seen equivalent stories elsewhere about potential leadership candidates, or indeed Frédéric Beauchemin, who's thus far the only declared leadership candidate for the Quebec Liberal Party. And the other thing I found, I don't know if you see that on your screen, it was the number one story in La Presse for the entire weekend, which I found rather interesting because for the brain trust likes to think, Charest, that name's political poison. I'm not entirely sure about that. I'm not entirely sure, especially when we see all the things that are happening elsewhere, when we see all the wheels and the wheels coming off and the piston shooting through the hood in terms of the CAQ's form of governance, and the fact that yes, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, leader of the PQ, he's done a good job. His party is leading in the polls. I really can't see when an election comes around, Quebecers actually hunkering down, saying, you know what, let's roll the dice on one of the parties that kept us in a political and economic deadlock for 50 years. So I find it very interesting that this article was posted. I find the reaction to it very interesting, and I have a sneaking suspicion. It's not my most fearless prediction. I have a sneaking suspicion that Montreal now will probably end up talking more to Monsieur Charest in the future than it has in the past.
Well, let me bring up this point. So I'm going to just take a leap here, if I will. The fact that this became the number one story in La Presse, it does seem a bit bizarre. I wonder how many people, Jim, people that don't read stories, they read headlines, right? Someone saw the name Charest and clicked on it thinking, what, Jean Charest is going to run for the Liberals?
Well, that could have been a factor. I mean, it wasn't about that. It wasn't about Jean Charest.
No, I know, but I'm saying people just seeing the last name and thinking, this is probably about him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might have been saying, oh my God, they're not going to come back, or they were not going to have a Charest 2.0. But on the other hand, the worst thing that can happen to you in politics is that people don't notice you.
Yeah. And
if nothing else, the experience this past weekend shows that it remains a name that will attract attention. If it's controversial, tant mieux. Quebecers like a good political scrap. But as I say, the reason I don't usually go talk to you about La Presse's weekend filings, but I just found this to be a remarkable story posted at a remarkable time about someone who may prove to be a remarkable personality in Quebec politics.
Well, Jim, of course, there's a bigger story as well. You kind of mentioned it. Fred Beauchemin, the only person who within the caucus has in fact declared he's interested in the leadership, is back in the caucus, Jim. They let him back.
Absolutely. It was all settled amicably, Aaron.
That's right.
It's all sweetness and light. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. But once again, I won't say it's a self-inflicted cut, but it is a bruise, once again, on the current version of the Quebec Liberal Party that it managed after, this rather ugly internal, well, not really so internal struggle with accusations of bullying and intimidation. Well, no. It's all been taken care of, and he's back in the caucus. And as I say, nothing to see here. Move along. And the best thing I can say about this entire episode, Aaron, is with the current state of the Quebec Liberal Party, not that many people are paying attention anyway.
Well, there is that. James Mennie over at the Montreal Gazette. Thank you, Jim.
Adamac.